So, thanks very much for reminding me. So, Ekkardt Sonntag studied Protestant theology and aspects of biblical interpretation, and he received his PhD from the chair for the study of the church in Islamic context at the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam in the Netherlands. And he was a guest lecturer at the Jordan Evangelical Theological Seminary, where he gave master courses. And he has fulfilled different pastoral positions and consulting roles for international churches. And currently, besides being a research associate at our research program, he is also working for Dan Mission, an independent Danish non-governmental organization for development cooperation, which has roots in the Lutheran Church of Denmark. I hope this brief introduction is okay. And if not, please, Ekkardt, feel free to add anything, and I would like to hand over to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning. It's very good to be here. I'm joining you from Amman in Jordan, and much like last year, I'm very aware that while it's obviously not the real deal to do this on Zoom, it means that I can join. I don't know if I otherwise would have been able to come. So I'm very glad to be here and to see you all. Right, so my name is Ekkardt Sonntag, and my background, as Nora just said, is in Protestant theology, and I became interested in the Middle East during my BA studies and did an exchange year in Beirut in Lebanon. And after finishing my MA studies and working in a church in France for 2 years, I moved back to the region because of my wife's work at the time. And this time we ended up in Jordan and have been there ever since, for now coming on 11 years. And while being here, I wrote my PhD dissertation with Amsterdam, but it was being almost completely based in Jordan. And that was an interdisciplinary New Testament thesis. And it was interdisciplinary in nature because I took elements from sociology and cultural anthropology to look at the epistle to the Hebrews and discern patterns of mediation that can be called Middle Eastern. So Middle Eastern ways of mediating conflicts, of mediating also favors and benefits between tribes and so on. So I took this in an interdisciplinary way, cooked the soup of it, and that's what I did for my doctoral studies. And a bit later, I started working in advisory roles for some churches and also some faith-based development NGOs. And currently, as Nora said, I work for Dan Mission, and I advise them on their faith-related work, what they do with faith actors and programs that have faith-related content. So since my doctoral studies, I've been on an interdisciplinary track, mixing sociology, cultural anthropology into the field of New Testament studies. And I've always enjoyed that very much because, yeah, I think if you set up an interdisciplinary research project, it just gives you a mandate to snoop around in fields that are not your own, but that are very, very interesting. It kind of gives you permission to do that, right? And I've always enjoyed that, dabbling in sociology and anthropology and sometimes even from political sciences and other fields, and got away with it. And I've always felt that the advantage of interdisciplinary research setups is that if someone criticizes you for what you're doing in one discipline, you can always say, oh, it's because it's interdisciplinary, right? So time restraints and space restrictions and methodological difficulties. You don't know how difficult my life is. I'm working interdisciplinary ways. That's obviously a joke because you can't do that as more and more researchers work in that way. So more is expected in each field, that you really excel and you're thorough in it. But as more and more people work in that way, you also get more company and more help and more colleagues and bigger teams and whole departments and research projects and programs that work in that way. And that's good because interdisciplinary research will solve a lot of problems and discover and fill a lot of knowledge gaps. So after my doctoral studies, I was drawn into this field of religion and sustainable development. I approached it at first as an interdisciplinary thing. And I liked it for that reason, and it went on for some time, some consultancies, but then I started a regular job with Dan Mission and a regular job, so side by side, it's almost 50-50, with Humboldt, with the research program on religious communities and sustainable development. And that's when my life became transdisciplinary. And now, as I'm sure you've discussed yesterday and the day before already, transdisciplinary, I mean in the sense that you work across academic disciplines and then add the fields and perspectives of practice and policy to it. There's even more to snoop around, and I enjoy it even more. And often I sit in Dan Mission program meetings and I get inspired for research projects, or vice versa. I read academic papers for my Humboldt commitment, and I get inspired for programs and projects on a practical level. And the idea for today's session, and that's not just today's session, but for me, that's also an ongoing seminar. I teach in this summer term, which with the same title, and also early but ongoing research that I'm planning. And this idea, religion education, it's a vehicle for everything. And for me, that's always with a Middle Eastern perspective. It came from a truly transdisciplinary moment a while ago. And I wanted to share that story with you before we start. I was I was looking for a focus subtopic within this field of religion and development. So as you might be aware, broadly speaking, this could be anything related to any of the sustainable development goals. And you can tell from the program of this masterclass and from the lectures that everybody has found or is finding their application focus points. So religion and ecology and gender justice and peace and social cohesion and whatnot. And I was drawn to education, so SDG 4, if you will. And there was a problem with that. And the way it was like this. It's a good topic, religion education, because a lot of religious actors provide education, but that's also its problem, because religious actors provide education and they always have and they always will. So what more is there to say, really? And maybe it's a little bit similar with health and religious actors. All right, they do it, they always have, they always will. So what more to say? But then came my transdisciplinary moment. So I was sitting in a meeting for Dan Mission, and it was with a consortium of 20 NGOs that all work with the Danish government in the same program, and they all work on projects in Jordan. And thematically, it was relatively broad, this group called the Danish Arab Partnership Program. They worked on a lot of things, quite broad. So it was human rights issues, it was youth participation, it was press freedom, it was women's rights and participation. It was quite broad. And Dan Mission is the only NGO in that group with a faith edge. And at that meeting, we were doing a tour de table. It was just generally updating. It's a quarterly meeting, what's happening in the programs. And it stood out to me that in almost every single organization's report, education played some role in some way, somewhere. So working on school curricula to include human rights issues, for example, or informal education projects for youth empowerment, education measures on press freedom, women's rights, and so on. And for us, it was true as well. So my organization works with school teachers of religious education on how to prevent violent extremism through interreligious dialogue and work towards social cohesion. And it was my turn quite to the end. And I said, it's astonishing that education came up in all our presentations. It seems to have a central role in all of our programs. And they all nodded. And one of them said, what is the tagline today? Yes, it's a vehicle for everything. He or she said, I don't even remember. So that was a transdisciplinary realization, if you will, something I just had to hear from the practitioners. And suddenly my religion and education thing for development, for sustainable development cooperation. It was suddenly interesting because religious actors offer education, that's boring, but as they offer education, what can they achieve in all areas of sustainable development as they do that as religious actors? So that then is, I think that's my hope right now, as I said, early days, but that I find much more interesting. What happens when they offer education as faith actors? How's that different? And it is different. So as I said, we worked for and still are working on preventing violent extremism through religious teachers at schools and mosques. Often those are the same people teaching at schools and at mosques. And that's a great project because once these religious teachers reflect a little bit more and are trained and are more developed, they can speak into this field very, very well and effectively. So in some contexts here in the Middle East and in Jordan, some marginalized contexts where the best career options are either drugs or Islamic extremism, and the kids take that to the school, and in religious and civic education class, you sometimes suddenly have all these statements throwing around. As a teacher, you want to be prepared, and if you are prepared and can manage that well, you can really help your students in that regard. And in the same consortium, the Danish Institute for Human Rights, in that same group, tried to do a very similar kind of thing, only without the religious element. They were trying to do it through other civil society groups, organizations, and partners, and they came to us at one point and said, "Share with us how you do the religious thing. We think that's much more effective, probably." So education is a vehicle for everything. That's just one example. And for what exactly, especially as religious actors, drive that in the Middle East is what we're going to talk about in the next 75 minutes. I did prepare PowerPoint. Give me a brief second to fire that up. I practiced this. I thought this through. 1 minute. Where's it gone? Okay, I trust you can see this, and otherwise.
We see that you started your screen sharing, but I can't see a presentation. So it only says Dr. Ekkardt Sonntag has started screen sharing, but I can't see a presentation. I don't know if it's...
Nothing yet?
Nothing yet. Do you want me to do that? And then you can see also the participants while presenting?
Yeah, but then I need to send you my thing because the other... No, that was just a PDF, you know, it doesn't have color and nothing. Well, how strange. This worked really well a minute ago. As I said, I did test it. Try now.
Yeah, now. Yeah, perfect.
Good. Okay. Right. So before we dive into topics, so vehicle for what can it be? We're going to talk about this a moment ago, in a moment. But let's have a small footnote before we start and look at why this is such a high potential field, and that has to do with the so-called, sometimes it's called the youth bulge in the age distribution of the Middle East, and I'm sure in some African countries it's going to be similar. So if you look at, I'm based in Jordan, right? So let me just start with that country. If you look at the age distribution of Jordan, it looks like this, and Jordan has 10 million people, and you look at this and you see roughly 1 million 0 to 4-year-olds, another million up to age 9, and you go up and you see grade school age, how incredibly many people that are. Every other Jordanian is 24 or younger. That's the median age, actually, 24. I come from Germany. The median age there is, I think, 44 or something like this. So it's just, for this relatively small country, it's a relatively big operation. So I sometimes dwell on this a little bit, and I think household size in Jordan is 4.5, 5 people. So I could go around the houses, 10 million, 1 million toddlers, 5 people in a household. I could knock on the houses around me, and I could show them a toddler toy. I have those lying around, so I could take this thing and I could go, "This is for your toddler," and every other house they would say thank you and take it. So this is what the society is like. And then if you look at the other countries, it's not the same everywhere. So Lebanon, for example, is relatively much older. Kuwait is the oldest. Yemen is the youngest. Nonetheless, compared to, from my Northern European viewpoint, it's a very young region. So that's for one. And then, so why is education high impact, high potential? I think this is one reason why it is. And why is religion high potential and high impact? Let me show you something that was interesting. I think last year or the year before, it came out by Arab Barometer, and I think it was commissioned by the BBC, and they just measured religiosity in the MENA region. And this is actually a chart that is supposed to show how people in the MENA region are getting slightly less religious. So you can see there how many people said they were not religious in 2013 is the green dots. So in 2018-19, that's the purple dots. More people are saying, except for Yemen, where it's the opposite, more people are saying, I'm less or I'm not religious. However, just in broad dimensions, again, if I compare this to my Northwestern European context, if you imagine this 10% line here of people who say they are not religious, in Germany, that would be for some measures like regular church attendance, daily prayer or devotion. This would be the margin of people who actually do it. So bottom line, the MENA region is quite religious. So those two remarks just by way of a footnote for why I think religion and education for sustainable development are just very, very high potential, high impact. So I want to do two things now. I want to go through 6 points that kind of fill in the blank a little bit in the sentences. It's a vehicle for everything. So first I want to go through 6 points, what actually the connection is between religion, education, and sustainable development. And we'll do this taking a text from Catherine Marshall. I didn't send that around, but I put the reference on the next slide if you're interested. It's a good overview text if you want to pick up the topic further in the future. And then after that, I want to talk about the text that I did send around, and I hope you all received it, by Masouda Bano, about state madrasa cooperation. So that's the plan. And then we have some time applying this to our own context, and we're going to split into groups. And I hope to hear from you afterwards where that all lands in your context. So let's quickly go through Catherine Marshall's 6 points. Global education challenges exploring religious dimensions. So you could say each of the coming 6 slides is one of these dimensions. So one dimension is simply education service delivery. Religious institutions run large education systems that provide a significant share of education in many countries. And she goes on to explain how this has been mapped out in some places in the world, especially in some African contexts. It has been initially mapped out what that means quantifiably. Tanzania, for example, almost 50% of school children are in church-related or church-based schools. At the same time, it's very patchy, so there's much more to learn and much more to find out to really describe how much of education provision has a religious origin background link of any sort. And it's unmapped because it's very, very diverse. So it's just complicated. All these different churches, denominations, and for the Muslim background, it's no easier. It's just difficult to deal with all these different stakeholders, and it's much easier, and that's what instead is often done, to deal with state-run systems, because for the sakes of international sustainable development efforts, you just want to be effective. So you go to the Ministry of Education and you work with them. But the risk is that you eclipse or you miss all the religious background actors that are also doing the same thing. And as I said earlier, they've been doing it for centuries, so they also don't scream here because it's just normal. And then sometimes you overlook things, is her claim when it comes to researching more education delivery and religion. Also, it's sometimes assumed that the state-run systems are the ones that include or that can combat poverty hindrances to education, so that cater to the broad masses, including the poor. But that assumption is being contested, and we'll come back to that in the next point. Two more examples, though, for the Islamic context, for example, it can go very different ways. So in Senegal, big Islamic education system exists, but it's very decentralized and it's very unregulated. The context such as Bangladesh, part of the system is under the state system and another part is not. If you look at the Middle East, and I don't know how, you know what, just put in the chat a number from 1 to 5, how familiar you are with Lebanon. 1 is barely know it, and 5 is expert, have been there, come from there, maybe. Could you just do that for me quickly? That would help me. Just rate yourself, how much or little you know. So Lebanon is a country that is very compartmentalized into sects. And for the German participants, don't hear Sekte. It's used in the sense of socio-political religious identity group, so to speak. And there are very many of them in the Middle East. There's 18 recognized religions in Lebanon, and 12 of them are Christian. And there's Shia Muslim and Sunni Muslim and Druze. Thank you for doing this. That's really helpful. So in Lebanon, for example, the author and researcher Helen Tanu says the school system is as diverse as the society, which is very diverse. And it's caused by, and it is causing, the sectarianism. And if you read the news on Lebanon, and have since 2019 especially, it's very tense for economic reasons. Corona came, and there's a big political deadlock. It all has to do with the sectarian makeup of Lebanon, and the school system is very sectarian because of it, and it's also reinforcing it. So it's a vehicle for everything. It can go both ways, for better and for worse, and also around in circles. At the same time, it's also the key for unlocking this thing and for breaking out of it. I'll get back to that in a little bit, especially some really cool research coming out of the Université de Saint-Joseph in Beirut. But let me move on to the next dimension. So the role in humanitarian emergencies. Widely varied actors linked to religious traditions play important roles in efforts to address contemporary challenges of assisting refugee and internally displaced people. So as refugee and displacement situations occur, the schools pick up the challenge. For example, in Jordan and more of the Syrian neighboring countries, there have been double and triple shifts at schools to cater to the refugee Syrian children. And religious schools also do this, and sometimes, depending on how much they are tied into the state system, they are a bit freer to do this. So if they feel a religiously motivated mandate to act in that way and to help in that way, and they are less tied into the state system and don't have to wait for marching orders, so to speak, from the Ministry of Education, then they can do this quite effectively and quite efficiently. And that's just the local schools behaving in that way. There are also international organizations such as the Jesuit Refugee Service or Caritas, World Vision, Islamic Relief that have very extensive programs for education in humanitarian crisis. So that's a big dimension for this connection. Understanding religion, understanding the other is another dimension that Marshall points out. And she's saying religious institutions often do not, and certainly should, contribute to defining what is taught in national education systems about religion across curricula. Increasing general understanding about religions is a fundamental part of identity and culture for the many world citizens who live in increasingly plural societies. So that's an issue in many contexts, including Western context, really global, is this question, religious literacy, to know the religious other well and in a way that enables good life together. That's a challenge, and providers of education and religious actors engaging in education can play a big role here, and that's especially true in the Middle East. So in Iraq, for example, you can go through all of primary and secondary education and only learn about your own religion and never about any of the other religions. Iraq is also relatively diverse, obviously Muslim majority. And in Lebanon, and just another example, one challenge is that there was the big civil wars in the 70s and 80s, and that was fought along religious, sectarian, again, hear it right, for the Germans, but it was fought along sectarian and religious lines. And there is still no, like in the curricula, there's no systematized way of teaching Civil War history in Lebanese schools. And there's just big gaps there in the curriculum. And that's a big field of engagement for actors that aim, for example, for enhancing social cohesion. It's a vehicle for everything. So, for example, the Iraqi Al-Amal Association, just to name an actor, so you've heard one, they have programs that are dedicated to making up for this lack of knowledge of the religious other in the country, and they just take that to the tertiary education sector, so to the colleges and universities, because there it's actually, you can fit it into the curricula. And that's a big field with big potential. I don't think the need is nearly being met for this topic of religious literacy. Sounds a bit technical. Understanding the religious other is just such a vital thing. Educational systems addressing questions of values. Religious institutions commonly highlight their roles in and concern for core social values. They play significant roles in preparing young people to be informed and proactive global citizens. These global citizenship challenges link at a fundamental level to ancient and broad questions about how educational approaches and systems address questions of values and how that translates into educational practice. I said earlier, there's interesting research by the University of Saint Joseph in Lebanon, and we had one of their researchers speak at our Middle East workshop in March. So basically what they did was to look at religious curricula written by religious leaders and operationalized in Lebanese schools for religious education. So he was looking what is being taught, then he was doing qualitative interviews with the leaders who wrote them, and then he checked what values exist in the respective religions, and then he checked how all of this aligns or doesn't with values of active citizenship and democratic values, and that was highly interesting. And basically, it's coming out these days, and you should look it up, but I don't have a reference to give to you yet. But what came out of it was that these things don't necessarily align. So religious leaders might write something into a curriculum, preach something differently that might be different from what the religion says, and that might be different from what is needed to build a democratic society of active citizens. So it's a big mess. That's the bad news, but it always comes with a lot of potential. So if you research this, and if you create data, and you start a discourse that can be used very, very well for sustainable development aspects, in particular here social cohesion, but also others, I'm sure. And there's a lot of space to research into and to write into. Another one, I think that's the almost last one, training of religious leaders. Training of religious leaders is a generally neglected topic for education policy. Yet in today's era of globalization, future religious leaders and scholars need heightened awareness about living within dynamic and plural societies and understanding, sorry for the dash there, issues of social change and development. Yeah, gender equality, for example. So again, a little detour. Let's think about the influence, and we touched on this earlier, and let's go back to it, the influence on life that religious leaders have. So what I'm showing you here is percentage of persons attending mosques in those countries. And it's a bar chart where you can see every Friday prayer, and the lighter shade of green is more than that, several times a week. And Jordan is top of the pops here. So 65% of people go to the mosque weekly at least, or more. Now this means that these religious leaders have a really, really high impact. And let me share with you one project of the German government, of the GIZ in Jordan, that works, that made religion a vehicle for, in this case, water preservation, and works closely with religious leaders. I'm just showing you snippets here from the web page, and you can go there and follow up if you're interested. So the headline is religious leaders support water conservation. Obviously, Jordan is a very water scarce country. Last time I checked, it was the 4th or 5th water scarcest country in the world. And there's constantly refugees coming in, historically, Palestinian, Iraqi, Syrian. It's a generational problem. So that doesn't make things easier. And there's this big project where the GIZ started working with partners and religious leaders. The project team, can you see my mouse pointer as well, actually? The project team works with the Jordanian Ministry of Water and Irrigation and the Ministry of Awqaf, Islamic Affairs. So that's the Ministry of Islamic Endowments that's responsible for all the Islamic endowments, such as mosques and other public use institutions, to encourage the population to use water responsibly. And then basically what they did is they trained imams and other male and female religious scholars so that they can serve as water ambassadors, teaching believers in communities how to use water economically and why this is important. One thing that doesn't come out on the website even as clearly as it really happened was that they managed to put the topic of water preservation on the preaching schedule in Jordanian mosques twice a year, and they had incredible results. So 2,500 religious leaders were trained, and the message of water saving has reached local communities. 22% of those who regularly visit mosques say they have heard something about water saving measures while attending a mosque. That's a raise of 14 percentage points compared to the beginning of the project. Of those who have heard something about water shortage in religious gatherings, 25% say that they changed their behavior after hearing about it. It might not sound like much, but this is it's difficult to achieve that sort of impact, really. And I would say probably you can only achieve this if you, for this kind of project, if you work with religious leaders in that way or a similar one. Last point of Catherine Marshall, and then we move on. Religious leaders as advocates or limiting factors for the education agenda. So that's what she finishes on. She says, religious institutions and leaders can be powerful advocates for social justice, including education for all at global, regional, national, and community levels. And likewise, the opposition or their tepid support can slow progress. And then we don't need to go into this very much, but she then quotes a couple of religious documents, like the encyclica, the papal encyclica Caritas in Veritate, which mentions education, but then she points out what could have been there, how much more there could have been in terms of advocacy. And she points at some religious leaders like Desmond Tutu who picked up the education agenda in more powerful ways. So that was an overview. And now let's move on to the text that I did send to you. And I wanted to be, at this point, just open the floor a little bit for those of you who did get a chance to read the text by Masouda Bano, co-producing with FBO's Lessons from State Madrasa Engagement in the Middle East and South Asia. What did you pick up from her about how Islamic madrasas work with, against, around, within the state structures? Just 2 minutes. I don't know how you've been doing this. Nora, maybe you could manage that a little bit. If you see hands, yeah, you could just unmute yourself and comment.
Yes, sure, but maybe can we stop the screen sharing for a moment so that we see the whole, yeah, great, thank you.
Anybody want to come in? You have more chance to talk in groups later.
Is it only for the reading, or can we comment on the presentation as well?
Let's keep the presentation comments for later, at the end of the whole session, because some things might also become clearer as we do the group work. But just for the reading, yeah.
If there's nothing at this point, Ekkardt, maybe we...
Yeah, then let me move on.
Yeah, in the later. Thank you.
So state madrasa engagement, basically she looked at those countries in East Asia and in the Middle East, and she looked at how, in Islamic contexts, how religious schools and state-run education systems interact and relate. And she gave a bit of a history of the madrasas. So in very, very broad strokes, they are schools that go back to even the time of the Prophet and teach the Quran. And then a bit later, around the 11th, 12th century, they become more formalized. And then more recently, there have been different paradigms in which the state education system and those madrasas have interacted. And she was pointing out a few of these ways of relating to the state. And the main three ones were co-optation, coordination, and confrontation. So basically, there have been some countries and some settings in which the state has co-opted the madrasa system. And this is how schooling looks like now for children, that the state has influenced the school, has incorporated them into their system, and basically they have been integrated. They still are what they are, but it's a co-optation. And from the state perspective, that also has in some societies, it has the advantage that the state gets moral credibility. It has the danger that the schools lose their moral credibility or their moral or religiously driven traction in the community. So practically, you could say on a community level, that's not a religious school anymore. That's now a state thing, and you could be skeptical about that. So, but that can go both ways, and that's a dynamic to be managed. If the way the relationship goes down is co-optation. Then there's, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to click that yet. There's coordination. I think Syria was an example of this, where there's just strict rules laid out by the state, and the madrasas are somehow controlled to color within the lines, but otherwise the two stay a bit more separate. And then there's confrontation, for example, in Turkey, where a strongly secularist state under the Ataturk rule basically dismantles them. And it was interesting, as you might have noticed, that the text isn't very recent. It's from 2011, and she's saying, with the exception of the Gülen schools, and in 2016, again, confrontation occurred, and the Gülen schools were outlawed as well. So those three ways of relating between state and religious education systems. And one of the things that I would like you to discuss in the group work is just in your backgrounds. And I hope we can mix groups a little bit, and Nora's going to help, so that we have more than one country or regional context in each group. And I'd like you to think a little bit, how does that work in my context, in my background? What have I experienced now? What do I know? Just the way how religious education actors and state education systems relate, does that fit one of these descriptions? And also, maybe there's another one or more. Maybe it starts with a C, maybe it doesn't. And you could talk about this and then feed that back to the group. I'd be very interested to hear that. And she also talked, and you could also, in the group in a moment, you could talk about the factors that influence the state-madrasa relationship. And one of the things, for example, that she pointed out was, she calls it socioeconomic factors. It's just money. So what happens if the state says, we're reforming our school system, this is what you need to do, and once you're done, you'll get money and we'll pay your teacher salaries? Are the schools opting in, staying out? And in the East Asian context, sometimes it was half-half, and then you have two systems almost, and that has then consequences and ramifications. So some schools are more tightly linked into the state system, and other schools stay outside of it. And that also makes them, I think her main point was what I said earlier, to balance this between religious and value and worldview credibility, and the more coming from the state academic credibility and connection to the international education standards and so on. So what other factors might there be, and how do they work out in your contexts? So that's the plan for the next 20 minutes, I would say, to go into groups and trust, basically. Sorry, there it is again. So the ideological freedom versus the control and resulting community connectedness, that also has to do with the academic content. She would make the point. Voila. So for the group discussion, here's my suggestion. I suggest if you look at the box over here, take 25 minutes, actually a bit less maybe. I think we should regroup at 10 past the hour. Be prepared to present your main results to the bigger group in no longer than 3 minutes, and alphabetically by first name. If you're the number one, then you facilitate the discussion. You make sure people move along, yeah? And if you're the last alphabetically, then you make sure a presentation comes out of it. So you take notes, and you can draw on other people, and you say, you describe that, you explain that, but you make sure that you have material for 3 minutes answering these questions. And the questions would be, share about your education, your country or region context, how faith actors providing education can be described. How central or marginal is faith-based education provision? What's the relationship between state and faith-based education provision? Is there co-optation, coordination, confrontation? Maybe there's something else. What's in brackets is a help for when you get stuck. So when you feel there isn't much, then think, what is there? Maybe just primary education, maybe just secondary education, or maybe just in the Iraq example, sometimes it's limited to tertiary education, and it's actually informal education. What that Al-Amal Association is doing, that there'll be informal tertiary, so it's a bit tucked away, but at the same time, it's very relevant and it's high potential. So think about this and take a few notes, and then if you have time, I hope some of you will have time, think, what research questions and knowledge gaps do you see in your region? Or if you want to talk about the Middle East or any other country of your interest, that's also fine. Concerning religion and education. So think what could be found out in quantitative ways, in qualitative ways. Also think in existing data. So like that Lebanese guy, for example, what exists? Curricula exists, I can look at them. There might be big policy documents like by the UN or by secular and religious actors like Catholic encyclicas. So you could just cook up research ideas from all of this. And also, lastly, and maybe most importantly, what connections will you make in your context? So going back to the subtitle, it's a vehicle for what then? It could be potentially any of the SDGs and related ideas. So that's the plan. I hope it's reasonably clear and fun to do. So Nora, if you could do your magic.
Yes,
and create
groups. The groups. I will open the breakout rooms, and I sent you the slides via email. So if you want to look at it again, unfortunately, we are not able to share our screen with you once you are in the breakout sessions. And if you have any questions, you can come back to the main room. You will find us there. Okay, great. I will open the rooms now. Ekkardt, could you maybe stop the screen sharing, so because some sometimes have trouble to enter the rooms.
Ich drücke mal Pause. Recording. Good. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a good time in the groups. So without further ado, Group 1, NJ and Philip, Ninaku, and Fenyo, would you like to share what you talked about? Just unmute yourself, I think, right?
All right.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So we had three. We had energy. Then there was me and Nina from Southern Africa, and then Philip gave like a German perspective in that regard. So just a stance. We didn't get to actually get to part 2, but for the first part, what I would say is that energy shared that education is a big influence, because there also is a general regional polarization. So the southern is mostly Christians, and then your northern part is Muslim. But you can clearly be able to see the influence in the education with in turn also will affect how moral behavior is perceived in that region. And then because of that split with the Christians in the south and the Muslims in the north, you find that in the south, there is this encouragement or there's this willingness to partner up, with Christian base, whereas in the north, that is not so much. So the partnership is sort of encouraged mostly in the south, where there's a strong Christian influence more than the northern one, that is from energy. And then in Southern Africa, we first spoke about apartheid, of course, and that was the main reason that split up, everything. And then while there is progress in terms of, the spaces coming together, we still are a mainly Christian nation. And then you find that other areas would then be isolated with other religions. And then in the governmental space, so in terms of the relationship between state, education, and religion, the government is indirectly mostly or tend to favor Christians, although that there is still leeway because the constitution does forbid, prioritizing of one religion over another. But then there still is leeway that are made for that, there's inclusion for other faiths as well. But there still is this predominance of that Christians does lead, because even in schools, you mostly find that your private schools will be the ones that are mostly Christian, and then hence that allows them to be able to be free with Christianity. But in terms of public spaces, or rather public schools, schools will often sort of align themselves with the leading religion in their area. And then from Jan Phillips, the gradual change from non-religious people, but also with the influence of immigration. So there is a shifting of that, but while there is no direct state relation, there still is sort of a sense of privilege, stands towards Christians, but then there shouldn't be such a direct affiliation between state and religion. That is then the kind of discussion that we were able to have in group one. Thanks.
Thank you very much. It's really interesting. To just move on to group two, Catherine, Deidre, Duduzile, and Swanelo.
Dudu or Chonello, one of you, or even Catherine.
Catherine, I see you speaking, but you have to unmute your mic first, please. Now you muted your mic again. Yes, give it a try now.
No, I'm not the one was recording. Duzila did it, I thought, or Dedra. I didn't record anything.
Okay, so that's not a problem, Catherine. So maybe to someone else of the group. Catherine didn't note anything down. So Deirdre, Duduzile, or who was it? I don't have the list in front of me. Or someone else of group two. Could you please just give us a small summary of what you discussed?
Okay, I thought Chonela and Dudu was coordinating, but if they're not wanting to, then I will. Shall I?
Okay, thank you.
Please do, yeah.
Okay. We basically spoke about the West Africa and South Africa, where in South Africa, as he rightfully say, our constitution does not allow to bring religion within our schools, in the public schools. But we do have madrasa in South Africa, but it's madrasa with an H at the back. And that is a Muslim school where Muslims teach the Quran and all other Muslim books to children from the age of about 4 to upwards. So they learn from age of 4 about the Muslim practices, the religious books, and so forth. And they also then, those that want to become imams, they also do that in the madrasa schools. Within the public schools, of course, it will results in 2010 Christians, And in schools, there was very much Christianity was explicit. In the foyers, there would be Bibles, there would be assemblies where students pray in the morning and so forth. But gradually, that had to be, you know, taken out of schools due to the plurality. I do find, of course, Muslim is very much explicit within their teachings, where Christianity, you know, is more obliging of the government, but which is for me problematic, because we need to bring Christianity also back, other than teaching a child on a Sunday, you know, once a week about Christians, or about what Christianity is about. However, in higher education, I lectured in an institution where it was first, it started in 1950 as a Bible school, and it obviously, you know, a Christian Bible school, and there you learn to become a pastor, or theologian, or whatever within Christianity, and that then phased out as the organization or the institution evolved, and it became more plural. So it includes more, you know, other religions and so forth within the curriculum, but it's still very much the vision, and is very much Christian based. We have the values and principles, and we explicitly express that as our mission, which is Christian based, but we are all inclusive from a theological perspective. It's a private university, and it all have modules or programs: psychology, sociology, theology, general education, and so forth, business, and so forth. But also our pedagogical approaches is very much focused on Paulo-Freirean approach, which is holistic. So we bring in Christianity because, of course, we have an agenda, and our agenda is Christianity, the same way Islam would have an agenda, and their agenda would be Islam. So we bring that in, but we don't explicitly express. We speak about God, we speak about you know, churches and so forth, but we also include the Muslim student, and we will make examples of temples. So it's an all-inclusive, holistic approach with the Christian base. So this is just one of a kind. I don't know of any other organizations that does that, and hopefully that can be recognized and corrected in future.
Thank you very much, Tidre.
Sorry. What Catherine was also speaking about, their universities which have Christian modules, but it's being phased out with all the secular modules, and that's a big concern for her. They also in West Africa also have madrasa, and she's also not sure whether it is state supported or whether it is self-supported.
Thank you. We will go.
And that was all the contributions in our.
Thank you. I see, I don't know, Catherine, you are belonging to the same group, but I don't know, because of the time, if we should skip, like go directly to group 3, or
let's move to group 3.
And if we have time, Catherine, at the end, yeah. So group 3, please. Do you have a few names, Ekkardt? I can't see the names anymore.
Alma, Idwo, Janine, Giselle, and Zoom account 1.
That's Felix. Okay, Felix. So if some of you, someone of this group would like to go forward.
Thank you for this great opportunity. I'll be addressing the issue at stake on behalf of our group 3. Mainly, we decided to pick Nigeria as our own case study. And notably from the lecture and from the question posed about the tools of engagement with religion and the states. Co-optation is visibly, it happened in Nigeria, whereby during the military regime in Nigeria, the government took over the mission schools, whether under the Christians or the Muslims. They were taken over without compensation. And when you talk about cooperation, it's also happening. Typical case study is Kwara State in Nigeria, where the states take over, or more or less run the school by recruiting teachers and paying their salary. and allow the schools, the missions, to manage every other thing, the syllabus and the day-to-day running, as well as confrontation. The religious bodies mostly at times are confrontational. Maybe some of you will have heard of Boko Haram, an agitation against anything Western, culture, education, or civilization. That is the most confrontational institution in quotes, against education in Nigeria. You might have heard of Bring the Chibok girls, and notably going to schools and kidnapping children, mostly girls, in Nigeria. Over 200 were kidnapped, I think 2013 or thereabouts. And up till now, over 100 are still in captivity without the children brought back. And I think 2 days ago, about 200 students were also kidnapped in their school. So you can see these are part and parcel of confrontational dispensation based on religion, trying to deny a child education, whereas we are talking about sustainable development goals, and education is the right. And from our own group, we want to highlight that it should be seen that whatsoever action any government, any religious body or organization is taking, it should be in the best interest of a child's future, that will not incapacitate the child now and later in the future, or make the child to be less important. Statistically, at the beginning of this year, the Ministry of Education gave a statistics that they have about 10.1 million children out of school, about 3 million increase from the previous year. And that is to show us the skewness of the issue. And mostly in the northern part, which is predominantly Muslim, that is where we have over 80% of these out of school children. And you have the Quranic schools that are not standardized in such a way that they can also run the real formal training or education that will help all those children that are going to this Quranic school to have a balanced educational system apart from the religious knowledge that they are being taught. Maybe some of you know Al-Majiri issue of having boys between the age of 6 to 15 leaving their parents' home, taken to another town to be under a Quranic scholar, to be mentored. But most often, these children are left loose to go around the streets, the town, begging for food, and only going back to the Quranic center in the evening to learn for 2 or 3 hours, and that's the end of the day. These are some of the fundamental issues. Education is everything, because once you are able to train an individual, you liberate him from ignorance, backwardness, doubts, fear, low self-esteem, and you give him courage and a weapon to live a meaningful life, because he will be able to take decisions that are logical, rational, and be able to stand on his or her own feet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Idolu.
Can I ask, thank you. Can I ask for the other two groups, did anybody talk about research ideas? In which case you could go first, as we're running out of time.
We have limitation of time in our own group to talk about that.
Yeah. And I did say this was optional. I was just interested. Otherwise, group 4 was Karel, Marie-Louise, Bernard, Nadine, and Patricia.
Thank you, Dr. Ekkardt. We didn't get to the second part, but I will quickly just give some feedback. So we had participants from South Africa and Germany and Ghana. South Africa, we were from different areas, so that was also interesting. So just a broad overview. As you've heard, we have secular schools, but private schools may be religious. So in our areas, we had a lot of Christian private schools, but there's also Christian kindergarten or Christian tertiary education, but that would be private institutions. Everything the state offers is not religion specific, although we all experienced in our own context that there is Christian periods, or like your break time can be used, and a faith leader will come in and will sing or dance or learn something. So religion is still part of the schools, although it is not in a formal way. So that's South Africa. Germany, religious studies is not that visible, but schools offer education on religion. It's just like one subject with everything in. South Africa also has that. And churches provide education such as kindergarten, or there's a Jewish school, but it's adapted to the state curriculum. So it's not that important in Germany, from my understanding. And in Ghana, the religion and the state work together. So for example, you get a Christian school, Catholics, like a Catholic school, or an Islamic institutions, but it also goes with the broad guidelines that the state gives. It also creates a lot of conflict. That was evident. It creates a lot of conflict. For example, in a Catholic school, Islamic students were not allowed to fast during Ramadan, which made a lot of which resulted in a lot of conflict. So there is a lot of faith-based schools, especially in rural areas, but yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of conflict over that. So that's where the discussion stopped. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And could the last group maybe just in 1 minute report on their findings?
Thank you very much. In the last group, we had Tsulu Fellow and myself are from South Africa. We had Emmanuel, who is from Ghana, and then we had we then had Adiko Akindoli, who's from Nigeria. And colleagues, if I got your countries wrong, please do pardon me. But in terms of Ghana, we had that Ghana really had, in terms of education, religious education is in the center of the system there. And they all really its roots to how the Methodists and the Presbyterian churches way back actually initiated and started education system, made a major contribution. I think owing it to that historical base, you find that those education there is right, faith-based education is right in the center. Nigeria also, as we have heard, there's also that historical base, and so it plays a critical role in terms of the education system in the country. South African view, I think Deidre captured it very well. I will not repeat that, but we owe our roots also to what the missionaries and others did to start education, but currently it is not in the center in terms of the education system in the country. And so those are some of the issues that were highlighted in a minute, Ekkardt.
Thank you very, very much. Our time is up. Thank you very, very much. It was really good seeing you all, and you all received, we didn't have much time for Q&A now, and I apologize for that. But you all have my email in the PDF that Nola sent around, so do feel free, and I'm very happy to correspond with you via email for anything, for any follow-up that you might wish. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ekkardt, for preparing this seminar. And I think that's the first real group work we had. I hope all the participants had the opportunity to meet each other and engage on very important topics. Yes, Catherine wanted to say something. If you are not in a hurry and want to go to break, please stay with us. Catherine, if it's a small contribution, I'm still here. And for all the others, we will meet in 28 minutes. Please be on time for Professor Feldkeller's lecture. Thank you very much. Catherine,
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. I just wanted to contribute about education in Kenya. I had shared with my group, and I said that we have public schools in Kenya, and they are the majority. Even the private schools, they imitate what is going on in public schools, and therefore we don't have a specific religious kind of teaching, apart from those who are Christians go to church on Sundays, and once they finish their Sunday services, it is not carried to schools. It is just spiritual part of it. And when they go to school, they choose their courses. They don't actually force students to do religious studies, although we have a course by name Christian Religious Education. You have to choose. It is not a compulsory course. Therefore, those who do it, they do it for their own benefit, although it is graded. And for that matter, the madras for Muslims, it's just like those Christians who go to church on Sundays. We don't know what happens there in their mosques. We just see them go, and whatever they do, it is not public. And therefore, in schools in Kenya, they are actually kind of separated from what theology is teaching. And in any case about the CRE, Christian education courses, they have a different approach, either in high schools or in universities, an approach that is quite different from what is being taught in the church. And for that matter, we are not really cooperated. We are not cooperating when it comes to education in the state and the education that is offered in churches. It's quite different. Maybe that's what I just wanted to add.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really, that's really interesting. It's astonishing that you say you don't know what happens in the madrasas. I found, for example, that I didn't know much how religious teachers are trained in the Middle Eastern countries, and I think maybe there are some knowledge gaps. Sometimes the answer might also be that it's less formalized and just very, very diverse. But I think that my suspicion would be that there's also a lot to be found out. So what I found out, for example, when I started looking into the Jordanian context a bit deeper, but I didn't find that written in English. So I had to talk to people to find that the imams are, there's a systematized way of training up to BA level and then continuous education, and that's all managed by the ministry. But then there's the muezzins, the muezzin, pronounce it in German, who do the call to prayer. And first of all, I wasn't very aware that they play a big role, because I just noticed from the outside that the call to prayer comes from a tape and sounds the same everywhere in the country. But then there is a muezzin in every mosque who then recites the prayers as people come in, so you don't hear that from the outside. And then I found out from somebody from the ministry that is a position that sometimes steps in for the trained imam, but he himself is not trained. And also he's not on the ministry's payroll. So you could think of situations where this person is maybe paid by some Gulfi or Saudi patron who could possibly have an Islamic or Islamist or extremist agenda, and also doesn't have training or has different training from what you'd expect. And that's something I wasn't aware. So I find it very interesting, and I keep running into these knowledge gaps when they might exist in Jordan and in Kenya and everywhere in between. And you could even be inspired from research work happening here for something that could also be worth conducting there. I'll take a quick break. I'll be back though.
No worries. Thank you for
Professor
staying
Ekkardt.
with us, and thank you very much, Catherine, also for
Yes, thank you.
adding
That was
this
interesting.
from the Kenyan context.